Today we have on our show one of my all-time favorite people, and I think one of the great people in the world of athletics and sports, John Feinstein, who I met in 1980 when I became the assistant coach at George Mason University, and John was working for the Washington Post, still is, but also he had written a book that started, I think, writing your book about Coach Knight, but we met that year. And what I want you to tell me about first, though, is that crew that you were working with when I met you in 1980, all the people, like the interns that were with the Washington Post.
Yeah, Rick, we had kind of an all-star lineup, especially now looking back. Tony Kornheiser was there, Michael Wilbon was there, Ken Denlinger was there, Dave Kindred was there, Sally Jenkins, Tom Boswell. We really had an all-star lineup. Barry Lorge, who was a great tennis writer who's since passed away. And I came there as a summer intern 2 years earlier and was lucky enough to catch on and stay there. And as you mentioned, I still write for the Post.
Well, tell me this. Why would a guy as smart as you choose to go to Duke University?
Because I'm not that smart, and you know it. Actually, you know why I ended up at Duke? There are two reasons. My dad wanted me to go to Yale, and I was recruited by Yale and by Duke as a swimmer. Otherwise, I couldn't have gotten into either place. But I went down to visit Duke in January on a basketball weekend. They were terrible back then, believe it or not. You're old enough to remember. Bucky Waters was the coach, and Maryland came in ranked second in the country with Lefty Driesell, and Duke beat them and in Cameron, and the place was crazy. And as we were walking out, I turned to my dad and I said, I know you want me to go to Yale, but if I get in here, I'm going here. And I did, and that's the story. That's how I ended up there, because of basketball, even though I was a swimmer.
Well, tell me, you mentioned your dad. Tell me about your dad. I know he was really heavily involved in the arts, and tell me about him.
Yeah, my dad he ran John F. Kennedy Center here in D.C. when it first opened, and later was the director of the National Symphony Orchestra and the Washington Opera at the same time. And people have often asked me, how could somebody who is the son of somebody who is so into the performing arts end up in jock world? And I guess the answer is that I inherited my father's passion, but I just directed it elsewhere. I was always the kid who got in trouble with the piano teacher because I came in with my hands dirty from playing football or basketball. And I once wrote a story about my father in a magazine, and the headline was The Mets versus the Mets, because he loved the Metropolitan Opera and I loved the Mets.
Well, tell me this. When you went to Duke, did you know right away you wanted to work for the student newspaper there? You got into it. Did you know you wanted to write?
No. As I said, I went as a swimmer and had no idea what I was going to do if and when I graduated. But my sophomore year, I fell down a flight of steps and broke my ankle. And I was sober, too. That's the embarrassing part. And a friend of mine who was working at the student newspaper, the Chronicle, had told me that it was a great place to meet girls. And so I couldn't swim. I'd like to write. So I went up to the Chronicle and started working there, and he was right. It was a good place to meet girls, so I stayed.
Did you ever know that first time at that game when you saw Lefty Driesell come in that you and he would become the friends that you guys have become?
Yeah, never. Not while I was in undergrad, because we hated Maryland. Maryland was really good, and my 4 years in school, Duke was 1-7 against Maryland, including a brutal loss in the ACC tournament. But 2 years after I got to the Post, I was assigned to the Maryland beat in football and basketball, and that's when I first got to know Lefty. And as you know, to know Lefty is to love Lefty. He's a character. He's an absolute character. He's smarter than you think. You know, you forget because of the accent that he's very smart, and he was great to me through the years, and we still talk all the time on the phone. And you know, you're an influential coach. You tell me why he's not in the Hall of Fame.
Well, I'm like you. I think he should be, because you and I both know that he revolutionized recruiting to what it is today, and it's amazing. And I'm with you. I know you've been a big on that bandwagon to get him in, and I think you're doing the right thing to do that.
Yeah, well, he changed basketball in so many ways, and he made college basketball matter in Washington, D.C., because it hadn't before, and kind of opened the door for John Thompson to do what he did at Georgetown, and coached 4 different places, non-basketball schools when he got there: Davidson, Maryland, James Madison, Georgia State, and went to the NCAA tournament at all 4 of them.
Now, you've authored 35 books, 2 New York bestsellers. I talked to you earlier about The Last Amateurs, and you've written, all your books have been great, but what is your favorite?
My favorite is The Civil War, actually, the book that I did on the Army-Navy football rivalry. But it's similar to The Last Amateurs, which was about Patriot League basketball, because what I found in those 2 books, and you know this, you went to a smaller school, that you don't have to be a future NBA star or a future NFL star. You don't have to play at Kentucky or Duke or North Carolina or in the SEC or in the ACC to care deeply about your sport. The kids who I dealt with in A Civil War, the Army-Navy book, and in The Last Amateurs, cared every bit as much about being as good as they could possibly be at their sport as the guys at the big time schools who are going to be first-round draft picks. And I love that fact, because they weren't going to become millionaires playing their sport, but they were every bit as passionate about it as the guys who were going to become millionaires, maybe more in some ways.
So with all that you're doing and you've done in sports, golf has been a big part of it, but talk about the difference in all the sports. You know, college basketball, what you've done, and you spend a lot of time with some great golfers, great individuals. What do you think it is that separates good from great?
Well, there's no question in my mind that in every sport, what separates good from great is the mental aspect. There are a lot of guys with natural ability at your level of coaching in basketball, obviously at the NBA level. In golf, if you walk down the range at a web.com event, the AAA tour, or even at a mini tour event, the golf swings you see are every bit as good as the golf swings you see on the PGA Tour. You can't really tell one from another unless you video it and break it down in slow motion. But the difference is inside your head. It's the desire, it's the commitment, it's the heart, it's the toughness, it's the willingness to work at your craft and get better. The guy who goes in the gym in the middle of the night because he wants to shoot 200 free throws, the guy who's on the range until dark, the tennis player who's out there practicing even when it's hot and it hurts like hell to be out there, those are the guys and women who become superstars or become stars. The people who get 100% out of what they've got physically and then are able to add to it because of their mental toughness or their passion, those are always the ones who have the most ability. People talk about Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods wasn't the best player in the world because he was the best striker of the golf ball. He was the best player in the world because he was mentally tougher than anybody out there. He knew he was going to make every clutch putt when he was still Tiger Woods. He knew he was going to beat that guy. He intimidated guys just by walking on the first tee. And same thing with Michael Jordan, if you go back. He knew that when the time came, he was going to make the big shot and win the game. Those are the guys who stand out above the others, the ones who know they're going to get it done, believe they're going to get it done, and always find a way to get it done.
Well, if you had to pick 2 of your favorite all-time college basketball players at any level, I'm not going to say one because I know it's hard, but a couple, who would you pick? Yeah.
Well, you know, when I knew Jordan in college and really liked him as a person. I remember the first thing he ever said to me the first time I interviewed him. He walked in, sat down, and said, "Coach Smith says you're okay, even though you went to Duke." And so we got off to that. That was the way we started, and we went from there. And for years, we always joked about that. Yeah, you're okay because you went to Duke. Yeah, you're okay even though you went to North Carolina. And I really liked Michael and his approach, and his work ethic was obvious. And you know that when he was a freshman in college, he was an excellent player. But he was the 3rd best player on that North Carolina team behind James Worthy and Sam Perkins that won the national championship. By the time he was a junior, he was the best player in college basketball. And I've said for years, the Portland Trailblazers made the worst pick in history when they took Sam Bowie ahead of him. And that's not that's not second guessing. I said it back then when it happened. So Jordan was one you could see very clearly, and I had a chance to see him up close early on. The couple others that come to mind, I'm just trying to think back through the years. I've got to include Christian Laettner. I think he's one of the 5 greatest college basketball players ever. Not one of the 5 greatest basketball players ever, but one of the 5 greatest college players ever. I go Alcindor, Walton, Oscar Robertson, who I didn't see, but I know about, Laettner, and probably Larry Bird as the 5 greatest college players. Notice Jordan's not on that list because he hadn't reached that level in college. And Laettner was another one of those guys who, when the game was on the line, he not only wanted the ball but was convinced that he was going to make the shot, and most of the time, as you know, he did.
Well, anybody that knows you knows that you are a hard person to say no to, and the one thing that you have done a great thing with alongside Tom Watson is the Bruce Edwards Celebrity Golf Tournament. And it's amazing, but I think you've done some great things, but I think that's one of the great things that you've done. And I know being there and hearing you at the end when trying to raise money, your passion and your love for that is just really, it's remarkable. And talk to that.
Well, first of all, your being there has been a huge help to us through the years, and you know I'm not just saying that, but Bruce Edwards was really my first friend on the PGA Tour when I first started covering golf. He was Tom Watson's caddy for most of 30 years, and in 2003, when he was diagnosed with ALS and knew he was going to die, he came to me and asked if I would write a book about him and his experiences with Tom, and as one of the early, full-time PGA Tour caddies. Jim Mackay, who is Phil Mickelson's caddy, refers to Bruce as the Arnold Palmer of caddies because he made it respectable to be a caddy with the way he handled himself and carried himself. And he and Tom were closer than brothers. And I did write the book. It was called Caddy for Life. And when we were working on it, Tom said something to me that I never forgot, which was, it's great that we're raising the money we're raising now because Bruce and I are getting the attention we're getting. But once Bruce is gone, it's going to go away. People aren't going to, that's the way life works. People move on. And that stayed with me. And about 6 months, I guess, after Bruce passed away in 2004, I went to Tom and I said, I want to try to keep Bruce's name alive. Let's try to build on this. And he and I came up with this idea to have an annual golf tournament. We formed the Bruce Edwards Foundation, and we've raised about $11 million for ALS research with the golf tournament since we started it in 2005. And I'm very proud of the work we've done because I think it has meaning, and I think one of my great dreams, and I'm not alone in this by any means, is that we find a cure for ALS much sooner rather than later. It's been 75 years, Rick, since people first became aware of the disease through Lou Gehrig, and we're still struggling to find a cure.
All right, let's close with this. What would your take on the state of college basketball today?
How much time do you have?
Whatever you want, you got it.
I love college basketball, as you know. There's still nothing I enjoy more than walking into a packed gym on a winter night, whether the gym seats 3,000 or 20,000. In some ways, I prefer the 3,000 because they're so much more intimate. I love the game. There are issues with the big-time game, as you know, as well as anybody. I think that the one-and-done rule is a pox, that it's hurting all of basketball at every level. I'm still not sure to this day, 30 years later, whether I like the three-point shot or not, but there's no question it has had more effect on the way the game is played than any rule in the history of the sport. I wish we had a competent basketball committee. It should be made up not of athletic directors and commissioners who, for the most part, don't know basketball. It should be made up of ex-coaches like Gary Williams and John Thompson and Lefty Driesell, and maybe a couple members of the media like Dick Hoops Weiss, who you know very well, who know and understand the game. And I hate the fact that the games are so long. that the TV timeouts have dominated the game. There are too many of them, in my opinion. You coaches don't need all those timeouts that you get. But overall, I go back to a line that Tony La Russa said to me about baseball years ago during the strike in 1994. He said, "John, baseball will survive because the game is better than all of us." And I believe that about college basketball. With all the flaws and all the mistakes that are made, college basketball will survive because the game's better than all of us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you. Love you, man.
Rick, anything for you. You know I love you. Thanks.
Thank you. All right.